It's strange. No one really tells you what your 20s are supposed to feel like. They talk about what you should do, work harder, build something, figure things out early. Like, this is the decade that decides everything. And I think I believed that. I thought there would be a moment where things started to make sense. Not perfectly, but enough to feel like I was moving in the right direction. Like there'd be some kind of internal shift where I'd wake up one day and feel certain. But it doesn't really happen like that. It's quieter and somehow more confusing than I expected. Because from the outside, it looks like things are moving. People are getting jobs and making money, starting things, posting wins, and it all kind of blends together into this idea that everyone is progressing. But when you sit with it for a second, it's hard to tell what that even means. Progressing towards what? I keep thinking I'm supposed to be heading somewhere clear, like there's a direction I should already understand by now. But most of the time, it just feels like I'm choosing things and hoping they lead somewhere that makes sense later. And no one really talks about that part. They say your 20s are important. They don't explain why it feels like you're guessing the whole time. There's this pressure that's hard to describe. No one is directly telling you what to do. No one is standing over you saying, you need to be here by now, or you should have this figured out. But somehow, it still feels like that. Like there are rules, just not written anywhere. You're supposed to be building something, becoming someone, moving forward. And if you're not, or if it doesn't look like you are, it feels like you're falling behind, even if you don't know what you're behind in. That's the part that doesn't make sense. I keep catching myself thinking, I should be further ahead by now. But ahead of what? There's no timeline anyone actually agreed on. No finish line that was clearly defined. Just this quiet sense that you're supposed to be doing better. And I think that's where money starts to creep in. Not in an obvious way. No one sits you down and says, this is how you measure your life. But it slowly becomes that. Because money is one of the few things that feels measurable. You can look at it and say, this is where I am. And in a world where everything else feels unclear, yeah, that becomes something to hold on to, something to compare, something to prove. Maybe not to other people, but to yourself. That you're not just drifting, that you're doing something that counts. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect money to feel like a kind of reassurance. Like if it's going up, maybe I'm okay, maybe I'm on track, even if I don't fully understand what that track is. And the weird part is, it works. At least for a while, you start to feel a bit more stable, a bit more in control, like things are starting to line up. But then, there are moments where it doesn't land the way you thought it would, where you hit something you were aiming for, and it doesn't feel like anything really changed. Not in the way you imagined. It's not disappointing exactly, it's just incomplete. Like you expected it to answer a question you didn't realize you were asking. And it doesn't. It just replaces it with a different one. And that's a strange feeling, because you've been moving forward this whole time, putting in effort, trying to be disciplined, trying to make the right decisions, and yet there's still this quiet sense that something isn't fully connecting. Not broken, just slightly off. And I don't think anyone really explains that part, that you can be doing things right and still feel like you're not exactly where you thought you'd be internally. I used to think that feeling meant something was wrong, like I needed to fix it, optimize something, work harder, be more focused. But I'm starting to realize it might not be something you fix, it might just be something you notice. Because the more I pay attention, the more I realize how much of this is built on assumptions I never questioned. Ideas I picked up somewhere along the way about what success looks like, about what matters, about what I'm supposed to want. And I followed them, not consciously, just naturally, because that's what everyone seems to do. You see what works for other people. You see what gets attention, what gets rewarded, and you start moving in that direction without really stopping to ask if it actually fits you. And for a while, that's fine. It feels like progress, like you're building something real. But then something shifts, not all at once, just slowly. You start noticing small things, things that used to feel important, don't hit the same anymore. Things you didn't think mattered start to feel heavier, more real. And it's hard to explain that shift, because from the outside, nothing has changed. You're still doing the same kinds of things, still moving forward. But internally, there's this quiet question that keeps coming up. Is this actually what I want? Not in a dramatic way, not like you're about to drop everything, just a subtle uncertainty. And it doesn't go away quickly. If anything, it gets clearer over time. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, because now you're aware, not fully certain, but aware enough to know that something isn't as simple as you thought. And money is still there in the background, still important, still necessary, still part of how you make decisions. But it doesn't feel like the full answer anymore. It feels like one piece of something bigger that you don't fully understand yet. And that's hard, because money is easy to measure. It gives you something solid. But the other things, clarity, direction, peace, those are harder to define, harder to track, harder to prove. So you end up in this strange place where you're trying to balance both, trying to move forward in a way that makes sense financially, while also paying attention to how things actually feel. And those two don't always line up. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And no one really tells you how to handle that. They just say, make good decisions. Set yourself up, don't waste time. But they don't talk about how unclear those decisions can feel when you're the one making them. How easy it is to choose something that looks right, but doesn't feel right later. And how you don't always realize that until you're already deep into it. I think that's one of the biggest things I didn't expect. How easy it is to move in the wrong direction. Not because you're careless, but because it makes sense at the time. Because it looks like progress. Because it's what you thought you were supposed to do. And by the time you start questioning it, you've already invested time, energy, attention. And it's not that it was wasted, it's just not as aligned as you thought it would be. And that's a difficult thing to sit with, because there's no clear correction, no obvious answer. Just a growing awareness that you're still figuring things out. Even now, maybe especially now. And I think that's the part no one really says out loud. That your 20s aren't this clean, structured period where everything comes together. It's more like you're slowly becoming more aware of how little you actually know. Not in a negative way. Just, honestly, you start to see things more clearly. The trade-offs, the assumptions, the way money influences your choices even when you don't realize it, and the way it doesn't solve everything even when you thought it would. And none of that means something has gone wrong. That's the important part. Because it can feel like that sometimes, like you're missing something. Like you should have figured it out by now, but maybe this is what it looks like. Maybe your 20s aren't about getting everything right. Maybe they're about noticing. Noticing what actually matters to you, not what you were told matters. Not what looks good from the outside, but what feels real. And that takes time. More time than you expect. Because you don't start with those answers. You start with guesses, with borrowed ideas, with things that seem right until they don't. And slowly, and through experience, through paying attention, you begin to see the difference between what works and what just looks like it should, between what moves you forward and what just keeps you busy. And I think that's where I'm at. Not completely lost, not completely certain, just more aware. Aware that money matters, but it's not everything. Aware that progress matters, but it's not always obvious. Aware that I don't have it all figured out, and maybe I'm not supposed to yet. Maybe the pressure I feel isn't coming from where I thought it was. Maybe it's coming from trying to turn this part of life into something more defined than it actually is. Trying to force clarity where there's still supposed to be uncertainty. And maybe that's why it feels off sometimes. Not because I'm doing something wrong, but because I expected it to feel different. More certain, more stable, more clear. But instead, it feels like this. A mix of movement and doubt, progress and questioning, momentum and pause. And maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's just part of it. Maybe the truth about your 20s isn't that they're easy or hard, or that you should be ahead or behind, or that money will fix everything, or that you need to have it all figured out. Maybe the truth is simpler than that. Just harder to accept, that you're still figuring it out. And you will be for a while, and that doesn't mean you're lost. It just means you're paying attention, and maybe that's more important than I thought.